The Middle Eastern theater of World War I saw action between 29 October 1914 and 30 October 1918. The combatants were on the one hand, the Ottoman Empire, with some assistance from the other Central Powers, and on the other hand, the British, the Russians and the French from the Allies of World War I. There were 5 main campaigns: the Sinai and Palestine Campaign, the Mesopotamian Campaign, the Caucasus Campaign, the Persian Campaign, and the Gallipoli Campaign. There were also several minor campaigns: the North African Campaign, Arab Campaign, and South Arabia Campaign. Both sides used local asymmetrical forces in the region. On the Allied side were Arabs who participated in the Arab Revolt and the Armenian militia who participated in the Armenian resistance during the Armenian Genocide, along with Armenian volunteer units. The Armenian militia formed the Armenian Corps of the First Republic of Armenia in 1918. In addition, the Assyrians joined the Allies following the Assyrian Genocide, instigating the Assyrian War of Independence. The Turkish Ottomans had the support of Kurds, Turkomans, Circassians, Chechens and a number of Iranian, Arab and Berber groups. The theater covered the largest territory of all theaters in the war. Russian participation in the theater ended as a result of the Armistice of Erzincan, after which the revolutionary Russian government withdrew from the war under the terms of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. The Armenians attended the Trabzon Peace Conference, which resulted in the Treaty of Batum on 4 June 1918. The Ottomans accepted the Armistice of Mudros with the Allies on 30 October 1918, and signed the Treaty of Chevreuse on 10 August 1920 and later the Treaty of Lausanne on 24 July 1923. Objectives: Ottomans and Central Powers. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers through the secret Ottoman-German alliance, which was signed on 2 August 1914. The main objective of the Ottoman Empire in the Caucasus was the recovery of its territories that had been lost during the Russo-Turkish War, 1877–78, in particular Artvin, Ardahan, Kars, and the port of Batum. Success in this region would force the Russians to divert troops from the Polish and Galician fronts. German advisors with the Ottoman armies supported the campaign for this reason. From an economic perspective, the Ottoman, or rather German, strategic goal was to cut off Russian access to the hydrocarbon resources around the Caspian Sea. Germany established an intelligence bureau for the East on the eve of World War I. The bureau was involved in intelligence gathering and subversive missions to Persia and Egypt, and to Afghanistan, to dismantle the Anglo-Russian Entente. Ottoman War Minister Enver Pasha claimed that if the Russians could be beaten in the key cities of Persia, it could open the way to Azerbaijan, as well as the rest of the Middle East and the Caucasus. If these nations were to be removed from Western influence, Enver envisioned a cooperation between these newly established Turkic states. Enver's project conflicted with European interests, which played out as struggles between several key imperial powers. The Ottomans also threatened Britain's communications with India and the East via the Suez Canal. Allies: the British feared that the Ottomans might attack and capture the Middle East oil fields. The British Royal Navy depended upon oil from the petroleum deposits in southern Persia, to which the British-controlled Anglo-Persian Oil Company had exclusive access. The Russians viewed the Caucasus front as secondary to the Eastern Front. They feared a campaign into the Caucasus aimed at retaking Kars, which had been taken from the Ottoman Empire during the Russo-Turkish War, and the port of Batum. In March 1915, when the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Sazonov met with British Ambassador George Buchanan and French Ambassador Maurice Paléologue, he stated that a lasting post-war settlement demanded full Russian possession of the capital city of the Ottoman Empire, Constantinople, the Straits of the Bosphorus and Dardanelles, the Sea of Marmara, southern Thrace up to the Enos-Midia line, as well as parts of the Black Sea coast of Anatolia between the Bosphorus, the Sakarya River, and an undetermined point near the Bay of Izmit. The Russian imperial government planned to replace the Muslim population of northern Anatolia and Istanbul with more reliable Cossack settlers. Armenians. The Armenian National Liberation Movement sought to establish an Armenian state within the Armenian highlands. The Armenian Revolutionary Federation achieved this goal later in the war, with the establishment of the internationally recognized First Republic of Armenia in May 1918. As early as 1915, the Administration for Western Armenia and later Republic of Mountainous Armenia were Armenian-controlled entities, while the Centro-Caspian dictatorship was established with Armenian participation. None of these entities were long-lasting. Operational area. The Caucasus Campaign comprised armed conflicts between the Ottoman Empire and the Allies, the forces of the latter including Azerbaijan, Armenia, Central Caspian Dictatorship, and the UK as part of the Middle Eastern Theatre, or alternatively named as part of the Caucasus Campaign during World War I. The Caucasus Campaign extended from the Caucasus to Eastern Asia Minor, reaching as far as Trabzon, Bitlis, Mush and Van. The warfare on land was accompanied by actions undertaken by the Russian Navy in the Black Sea region of the Ottoman Empire. On 23 February 1917, the Russian advance was halted following the Russian Revolution, and later the disintegrated Russian Caucasus Army was replaced by the forces of the newly established Armenian state, which comprised the previous Armenian volunteer units and the Armenian irregular units. During 1918 the region also saw the establishment of the Central Caspian Dictatorship, the Republic of Mountainous Armenia, and an allied force named Dunsterforce, which was composed of elite troops drawn from the Mesopotamian and Western fronts. The Ottoman Empire and German Empire fought each other at Batumi after the arrival of the German Caucasus expedition, whose prime aim was to secure oil supplies. On 3 March 1918, the conflict between the Ottoman Empire and Russia ended with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and on 4 June 1918, the Ottoman Empire signed the Treaty of Batum with Armenia. However, the armed conflicts extended as the Ottoman Empire continued to engage with the Central Caspian Dictatorship, Republic of Mountainous Armenia, and British Empire forces from Dunsterforce until the Armistice of Mudros was signed on 30 October 1918. Top. Destruction in the city of Erzurum, left upper. Russian forces, left lower. Wounded Muslim refugees, right upper. Ottoman forces, right lower. Armenian refugees. The Gallipoli Campaign, February-April 1915. Top. The size of the stars show where the active conflicts occurred in 1915. Left upper. Armenians defending the walls of An in the spring of 1915. Left lower. Armenian resistance in Urfa. Right. A 70-year-old Armenian priest leading Armenians to battlefield. Ottomans on the Eastern European Front. Over 90,000 Ottoman troops were sent to the Eastern European Front in 1916, to participate in operations in Romania in the Balkans campaign. The Central Powers asked for these units to support their operations against the Russian army. Later, it was concluded that the deployment was a mistake, as these forces would have been better placed remaining to protect Ottoman territory against the massive Erzurum offensive that the Russian army had begun. The relocation of troops to the Eastern European Front was initiated by Enver. It was originally rejected by the German Chief of Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, but his successor, Paul von Hindenburg, agreed to it, albeit with reservations. The decision was reached after the Brusilov offensive, as the Central Powers were running short of men on the Eastern Front. In the deployment, Enver sent the 15th Army Corps to Galicia, the 6th Army Corps to Romania, and the 20th Army Corps and 177th Infantry Regiment to Macedonia in early 1916. There are two Turkish sources regarding these operations, and respectively they state 117,000 and 130,000 men were sent. but both agree that nearly 8,000 of them were killed in action, with another 22,000 being wounded. Forces. Central powers after the Young Turk Revolution and the establishment of the Second Constitutional Era on 3 July 1908. A major military reform started. Army headquarters were modernized. The Ottoman Empire was engaged in the Turco-Italian War and Balkan Wars, which forced more restructuring of the army. Only a few years before the First World War. During this period, the empire divided its forces into armies. Each army headquarters consisted of a chief of staff, an operations section, intelligence section, logistics section and a personnel section. As a long-established tradition in the Ottoman military, supply, medical and veterinary services were included in these armies. In 1914, before the empire entered the war, the four armies divided their forces into corps and divisions such that each division had 3 infantry regiments and an artillery regiment. The main units were 1st Army with 15 divisions, 2nd Army with 4 divisions plus an independent infantry division with 3 infantry regiments and an artillery brigade, 3rd Army with 9 divisions, 4 independent infantry regiments and 4 independent cavalry regiments, and the 4th Army with 4 divisions. In August 1914, 36 infantry divisions organized, 14 were established from scratch and were essentially new divisions. In a very short time, 8 of these newly recruited divisions went through major redeployment. During the war, more armies were established, 5th Army and 6th Army in 1915, 7th Army and 8th Army in 1917, and Kuvayi and Zabatiya and the Army of Islam, which had only a single corps, in 1918. By 1918, the original armies had been so badly reduced that the empire was forced to establish new unit definitions which incorporated these armies. These were the Eastern Army Group and Yildirim Army Group. However, although the number of armies was increasing over the 4 years of the war, the empire's resources of manpower and supplies were declining, so that the army groups in 1918 were smaller than the armies of 1914. The Ottoman army was still partially effective until the end of the war. Most military equipment was manufactured in Germany or Austria, and maintained by German and Austrian engineers. Germany also supplied most of the military advisors. A force of specialist troops was dispatched in 1917, and increased to a fighting force of 2 regiments in 1918. The German Caucasus expedition was established in the formerly Russian Transcaucasia around early 1918 during the Caucasus Campaign. Its prime aim was to secure oil supplies for Germany and stabilize the nascent pro-German Democratic Republic of Georgia. The new republic brought the Ottoman Empire and Germany into conflict, with exchanges of official condemnations between them in the final months of the war. Recruitment. The Ottoman Empire established a new recruitment law on 12 May 1914. This lowered the conscription age from 20 to 18, and abolished the read-off or reserve system. Active duty lengths were set at 2 years for the infantry, 3 years for other branches of the army and 5 years for the navy. These measures remained largely theoretical during the war. Traditional Ottoman forces depended on volunteers from the Muslim population of the empire. Additionally, several groups and individuals in the Ottoman society volunteered for active duty during the World War. The major examples being the Mevlevi and the Qadiri. There were also units formed by Caucasian and Rumelian Turks, who took part in the battles in Mesopotamia and Palestine. Among Ottoman forces, volunteers were not only from Turkic groups, there were also smaller numbers of Arab and Bedouin volunteers who fought in the campaign against the British to capture the Suez Canal, and in Mesopotamia. Volunteers were considered unreliable by the organized army, due to a lack of training and a perception of mainly mercenary interests from the Arab and Bedouin volunteers. Heavy fighting also placed pressure on the Ottoman volunteer system. Entente nations. Before the war, Russia had the Russian Caucasus Army, but almost half of this was redeployed to the Prussian front after the defeats at the battles of Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes, leaving behind just 60,000 troops in this theater. In the summer of 1914, Armenian volunteer units were established under the Russian armed forces. Nearly 20,000 Armenian volunteers expressed their readiness to take up arms against the Ottoman Empire as early as 1914. These volunteer units increased in size during the war, to the extent that Bofos-Nuba, in a public letter to the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, stated that they numbered 150,000. The Assyrian people of southeast Anatolia, northern Mesopotamia and northwestern Persia also threw in their lot with the Russians and British, under the leadership of Aga Petros and Malik Koraba. In 1914, there were some British Indian Army units located in the southern parts of Persia. These units had extensive experience in dealing with dissident tribal forces. The British later established the Mediterranean Expeditionary Force, British Dardanelles Army, Egyptian Expeditionary Force, and in 1917 they established Dunster Force under Lionel Dunsterville, consisting of less than 1,000 Australian, British, Canadian and New Zealand troops accompanied by armoured cars, to oppose Ottoman and German forces in the Caucasus. In 1916, an Arab revolt began in the Hejaz. About 5,000 regular soldiers served with the forces of the revolt. There were also many irregular tribesmen under the direction of the Emir Faisal and British advisors. Of the advisors, T.E. Lawrence is the best known. France sent the French Armenian Legion to this theatre as part of its larger French Foreign Legion. Foreign Minister Aristide Briand needed to provide troops for French commitment made in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was still secret. Bofos-Nuba, the leader of the Armenian National Assembly, met with Somark Sykes and Georges Picot after signing the French-Armenian Agreement. General Edmund Allenby, the commander of the Egyptian Expeditionary Force, extended the original agreement. The Armenian Legion fought in Palestine and Syria. Many of its volunteers were later released from the Legion to join their respective national armies. The Armenian National Liberation Movement commanded the Armenian Fedai during these conflicts. These were generally referred to as Armenian militia. In 1917, the Dashnaks established an Armenian corps under the command of General Tofmas Nazarbakian which, with the declaration of the First Republic of Armenia, became the military corps of this new Armenian state. Nazarbakian became the first commander-in-chief. Recruitment. Before the war, Russia established a volunteer system to be used in the Caucasus Campaign. In the summer of 1914, Armenian volunteer units led by Andronik Ozanian were established under the Russian armed forces, as the Russian Armenian conscripts had already been sent to the European front. This force was uniquely established from Armenians that were neither Russian subjects nor obliged to serve. The Armenian units were credited with no small measure of the success gained by the Russian forces, as they were natives of the region, adjusted to the climatic conditions, familiar with every road and mountain path, and had real incentives to fight. The Armenian volunteers were small, mobile, and well adapted to the semi-guerrilla warfare. They did good work as scouts, but also took part in numerous pitched battles. In December 1914, Nicholas II of Russia visited the Caucasus Campaign. Addressing the head of the Armenian Church, and Alexander Kataisian, president of the Armenian National Bureau in Tiflis, he said, "From all countries Armenians are hurrying to enter the ranks of the glorious Russian army, with their blood to serve the victory of the Russian army. Let the Russian flag wave freely over the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus. Let the peoples, Armenian, remaining under the Turkish yoke receive freedom. Let the Armenian people of Turkey who have suffered for the faith of Christ receive resurrection for a new free life." Nicholas II of Russia. Asymmetrical forces. The forces used in the Middle Eastern theater were not only regular army units which engaged in conventional warfare, but also irregular forces engaging in what is known today as asymmetrical conflict. Contrary to myth, it was not T.E. Lawrence or the British Army that conceptualized a campaign of internal insurgency against the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East. It was the Arab Bureau of Britain's Foreign Office that devised the Arab Revolt. The Arab Bureau had long felt it likely that a campaign instigated and financed by outside powers, supporting the breakaway-minded tribes and regional challenges to the Ottoman government's centralized rule of their empire, would pay great dividends in the diversion of effort that would be needed to meet such a challenge. The Ottoman authorities devoted far more resources to contain the threat of such an internal rebellion than the Allies devoted to sponsoring it. Germany established its own intelligence bureau for the East just before the outbreak of war. It was dedicated to promoting and sustaining subversive and nationalist agitations in the British Indian Empire, as well as in the Persian and Egyptian satellite states. Its operations in Persia, aimed at fomenting trouble for the British in the Persian Gulf, were led by Wilhelm Wassmuss, a German diplomat who became known as the German Lawrence of Arabia, or Wassmuss of Persia.